continue with my story of King David. Not my story, but this will be the third installment as I've been going through his life, and that's not really what I intended to do starting out. But it's hard to know where to stop in this tale of King David. One of the most pivotal figures in the entire Bible, and maybe not something that we sit and read a lot. I almost feel guilty because this is one of my favorite parts of the Bible. The books of Samuel, there's so much in there. There's action and adventure and intrigue and all this stuff, and it almost reads like a novel. It's always a appeal to me, so I'm not preaching a pet peeve, but I'll admit to preaching a favorite of mine in this instance. So last time we stopped, David was he was peaking. He's getting near his peak. Things are very good. He's king over all of Israel. If you remember, he had just received the promise that God would build him a house that would last forever and set up that dynasty. If you'll remember, he wanted to build a temple for God, and God turned it on him and said, "You want to build me a house? I'm going to build you a house." And the significance of God choosing a physical, fallible human family to entrust his son to, his lineage to, the lineage of, the Son of God, of Christ's lineage is what's set apart at this point in time. It's a great honor. It's a great honor for David, to David, and it's also a pretty profound lesson in God's mercy, because David is so utterly human in these stories. He's a man. He's a person like me and you, who has ups and downs, who goes through trials, who is tempted, makes mistakes, he gets off track, he suffers. He suffers just immensely, and yet we know that he was beloved of God and that he was never abandoned, and he never, ever, ever gave up. He never, ever, ever gives up, even though the things that he had to go through in his life were overwhelming at times, the pressure and the hurt and the sorrow that must have been involved in a lot of those things. He never abandoned his sincerity or his trust in God. Never in any of that does that waver. And that's a very profound lesson to keep with us, and I think it's very significant because of the kinds of things that he faces, and the highs and the lows that he goes through in his life. And I feel like there's a big message of hope in that for anybody, especially when we struggle and we worry about God's mercy, or we worry about how things are going to work out. David is a wonderful lesson in that. So we're going to start with a few verses from when David brought the ark to Jerusalem. We're going to open up to 1 Chronicles 15 to pick those up. I think that's a slight backtrack from where we ended our tale last time, if you will, but I want to bring out some of the character that David has in this, and what God is giving to him and trusting him with. Maybe you'll remember when David first determines to bring the ark to Jerusalem. He prepares a place for it and all that. They go get it and they throw it on a cart, and they're hauling it up there. It shakes. This guy named Uzzah puts out his hand to steady the ark. He takes hold of it, and bang, Uzzah gets dropped dead. They call the police, Perez Uzzah, like a breach has been made against Uzzah. And David's afraid at this point in time. He's not sure that he even wants. He said, I'm going to bring the ark to be right here by me, and this is what it's like. He's a little worried at that point in time. So they leave it in the house of this guy, Obed-Edom, and this guy's blessed the entire time the ark is there. And it's like David gets his stuff in order. He figures out what's going on, and he goes ahead and brings it up to Jerusalem. We're going to read in 1 Chronicles 15, starting in verse 11, just a couple of verses here. In verse 11, "And David called for Zadok and Abiathar, the priests, and for the Levites, and for Uriel, Asaiah, and Joel, Shemaiah, and Eliel, and Aminadab. And he said unto them, You are the chief of the fathers of the Levites. Sanctify yourselves, both you and your brethren, that you may bring up the ark of God, the ark of the Lord God of Israel, unto the place that I have prepared for it. For because you did it not at the first, the Lord our God made a breach upon us, and for that we sought him not after the due order. So the priests and the Levites sanctified themselves to bring up the ark of the Lord God of Israel. And the children of the Levites bare the ark upon their shoulders with the staves thereon, as Moses commanded, according to the word of the Lord." And also I'd like to, pick out verse 2 back up here, just a little bit higher up in the chapter. Then David said, "None ought to carry the ark of God but the Levites, for them hath the Lord chosen to carry the ark of God and to minister unto him forever." It's interesting to me that David's response to this, he was worried. He sees obviously something's wrong. Uzzah's dead. Like, what's the deal? Here we're honoring God. We're bringing him. Everything's going good. The kingdom's established. Things are going great. What's going on? What did we do wrong? And it seems like David has to figure out what's wrong and fix it. Has to fix it. They have to go to Scripture. They have to see what the proper procedure is. And you see David putting this back in place. You imagine how much knowledge has to be lost along the way for that to be the case. Even in, I think early in the book of Samuel, when we read about Eli as the high priest and his two sons are very bad and corrupt dudes. Even then, when they take the ark of God, they call for the ark to go out in battle in front of them. Even then, they know that they're supposed to carry, it's supposed to be borne by the sons of Aaron on these staves, as God commanded, as these scriptures laid out. That's the way that you're supposed to do it. And you don't really fool around with the way that God says you are supposed to do things. But in this interim period, it's like nobody knew anymore. I mean, obviously, Eli's family was cut off. Saul killed the city of the priests. If you remember when David fled there, Saul, wiped out a whole city full of priests. And so maybe some of that knowledge is lost, but David sets this right, and he restores the proper service. And you got to keep in mind how sacred this is that we're talking about. I mean, they talk about bearing the ark in front of Israel and stuff like that, but the rest of the time, the ark is sitting in the holiest of holies. We're talking about the place that the high priest even only goes once a year, and that with blood on the Day of Atonement. The most solemn and serious ritual of the entire year was the Feast of Atonement, is the Feast of Atonement, a fast day. You don't even eat or drink. Like, this is, you don't just go traipsing in there and treat the ark of God, which contains the covenant that he's made with Israel, lightly. And David acknowledges that, and he puts things back the way that they're supposed to be. And there's certainly a larger lesson in that as to how we approach to God, to take it seriously, to do it the right way and follow what he has prescribed for us. I'm going to read the psalm that David writes, that he gives to the singers after the ark arrives. That's one chapter over. 1 Chronicles 16. It starts down in verse 7 there. Let's see, it goes on to the next page. Down in verse 7, we'll start reading. Then on that day, David delivered first this psalm to thank the Lord into the hand of Asaph and his brethren. And here it goes. I won't sing, don't worry. Give thanks unto the Lord, call upon his name, make known his deeds among the people. Sing unto him, sing psalms unto him, talk you of all his wondrous works, glory you in his holy name. Let the heart of them rejoice that seek the Lord. Seek the Lord in his strength, seek his face continually. Remember his marvelous works that he hath done, his wonders and the judgments of his mouth. O you seed of Israel, his servant, you children of Jacob, his chosen ones. He is the Lord our God. His judgments are in all the earth. Be you mindful always of his covenant, the word which he commanded to 1,000 generations, even the covenant which he made with Abraham, and of his oath with Isaac, and has confirmed the same to Jacob for a law, and to Israel for an everlasting covenant, saying, Unto thee will I give the land of Canaan, the lot of your inheritance. When you were but few, even a few, and strangers in it, and when they went from nation to nation, and from one kingdom to another people, he suffered no man to do them wrong. Yea, he reproved kings for their sakes, saying, Touch not my anointed, and do my prophets no harm. Sing unto the Lord, all the earth. Show forth from day to day his salvation. Declare his glory among the heathen, his marvelous works among all nations. For great is the Lord, and greatly to be praised. He also is to be feared above all gods. For all the gods of the people are idols, but the Lord made the heavens. Glory and honor are in his presence. Strength and gladness are in his place. Give unto the Lord, you kindreds of the people. Give unto the Lord glory and strength. Give unto the Lord the glory due to his name. Bring an offering and come before him. Worship the Lord in the beauty of holiness. Fear before him all the earth. The world also shall be stable, that it be not moved. Let the heavens be glad, and let the earth rejoice, and let men say among the nations, The Lord reigns. Let the sea roar and the fullness thereof. Let the fields rejoice and all that is therein. Then shall the trees of the wood sing out at the presence of the Lord, because he comes to judge the earth. O give thanks unto the Lord, for he is good, for his mercy endures forever. And say ye, Save us, O God of our salvation, and gather us together, and deliver us from the heathen, that we may give thanks unto thy holy name, and glory in thy praise. Blessed be the Lord God of Israel forever and ever. And all the people said, Amen, and praise the Lord. And I would add to that, Amen. Amen. You can keep the covenant of the Lord in your mind, his statutes in your heart, if you remember his mighty works, if you trust in him for deliverance, if we look to him for salvation. I mean, what is lacking out of this psalm? What is lacking as far as a reference to what is necessary in our relationship to God? If this was the song that was stuck in our heads all day, every day, I mean, I don't exactly know how you'd rock it, but I'm sure Asaph figured it out. I'm sure the people really got down and liked that one. That's maybe that was gratuitous. You just figure these songs rock. You just got to figure like it was good. You would do well. You would do well to keep those things in your mind and in your heart all the time. It's a powerful thing. It's a powerful message that he lays out in this song. This is a song. It's for the people to sing and rejoice to. After that, the kingdom is fully established. David is really completing the work that was set in motion under Joshua. It talks about the people were not able to overcome all the inhabitants of the land at that point in time due to numbers, due to doubt maybe. God says he leaves some of them in place to test them, to see if they'll be faithful, and we know how through Judges that really ebbs and flows. Well, David's the one that ends up really getting it done and setting up the kingdom, establishing Israel's borders as we conceive of it. Even today, these borders that David established are an issue and are something that the Jews hark back to. When we talk about Gaza or the West Bank or a settlement with the Palestinians or anything like that, the devout and the serious in Israel cite these very things as their claim to the land that God promised to them. It makes it very important. It makes it very relevant even for today. We're going to read down in 1 Chronicles 18, starting in verse 1. Now after this it came to pass that David smote the Philistines and subdued them, and took Gath and her towns out of the hand of the Philistines. And he smote Moab, and the Moabites became David's servants, and brought gifts. And David smote Hadarezer, king of Zobah, unto Hamath, and he went to establish his dominion by the river Euphrates. That's a good ways there, isn't it? Verse 4. David took from him 1,000 chariots, and 7,000 horsemen, and 20,000 footmen. David also hewed all the chariot horses, but reserved of them 100 chariots. And when the Syrians of Damascus came to help Hadarezer, king of Zobah, David slew of the Syrians 22,000 men. Then David put garrisons in Syria Damascus, and the Syrians became David's servants and brought gifts. Thus the Lord preserved David whithersoever he went. And let's jump down to verse 12 as well. Moreover, Abishai, the son of Zeruiah, slew of the Edomites in the valley of Salt 18,000, and he put garrisons in Edom, and all the Edomites became David's servants. Thus the Lord preserved David whithersoever he went. So David reigned over all Israel and executed judgment and justice among all his people. And Joab, the son of Zeruiah, was over the host, and Jehoshaphat, the son of Ahilud, recorder, and Zadok, the son of Ahitub, and Abimelech, the son of Abiathar, were the scribes, and Shavsha was scribe. And Benaiah, the son of Jehoiada, was over the Cherethites and the Pelethites, and the sons of David were chief about the king. This is the kingdom being fully established. David's enemies being put down. Their foes, even though there's a relation, there's a family relation with the Moabites and the Ammonites and the Edomites. Those bonds were not strong at this point in time. The trouble that they caused Israel as they made their way there, and it had been trouble. It had been trouble in the interim as well. They had oppressed Israel at times. And David really puts that all to a stop. When you talk about him executing judgment and justice among all his people, let's not just read over that and think lightly of it. We have a system of judgment and justice in this country that is taken for granted at times, and at other times needs to be ramped up and a little more forceful for the sake of good people to be able to go about their business, unmolested, if you will. I mean, if you take what's happening, for instance, in Washington, D.C. right now, we take for granted that we can call the police and that there can be justice and that there is somebody to intervene when it's needed, and, somebody's not just going to take your stuff and with no repercussion. Well, that's what it is in many places of the world, just detached and in a might makes right kind of scenario. And do you really want to live like that? You might, in the flower of your youth and the strength of your manhood, you might think, I'm going to take whatever I want. But, we all, that comes and then that goes, and we're all weak at times. You can always be overwhelmed by more people. Like, do you want to be in a situation where sheer raw power is the only thing that gets stuff done? That's not what God intends, and that's not the system that David put in place either. It's a tremendous blessing to the people. But as this happens, David is successful. His enemies are subdued. They're serving him. They're bringing tribute and all these things at this point in time. We get to a place that's dangerous for our own humanity. When life is good, when we're really proud of our accomplishments or whatever it may be, we think everything's going really great, it's easy at that point to get complacent and to make mistakes. I mean, consider the warning that Moses gave to Israel before his death, that he knew that they were going to go into the land, they're going to take it. Once they're set up and once they're fat and happy and, land of milk and honey and everything's going great, he said, I know that you're going to forget your God and you're going to turn away and you're going to worship other gods and you're going to start fooling around and smiting each other and acting in ways that you should not. And that is a sad fact of humanity, that when things do go very well, we often forget to thank God who makes that possible, and instead we get a little vain about it and look what my hand has done, and all this kind of stuff. Nobody is immune from that necessarily. Even David maybe is not immune from that. Let's go back to 2 Samuel to pick up our story again. 2 Samuel here. And we're going to go to chapter 11. 2 Samuel chapter 11, because now that this is the case, now that Israel is fairly well established and secure, you'll see that David's not out there leading from the front in the way that he once was. Here we have 2 Samuel 11. We're going to start in verse 1. And it came to pass, after the year was expired, at the time when kings go forth to battle, that David sent Joab and his servants with him, and all Israel, and they destroyed the children of Ammon, and besieged Rabbah. But David tarried still at Jerusalem. Why does David stay there? Things have gone so good. Israel is very strong at this point in time. I read in Chronicles, getting ready for this a few days ago, about the numbers of people that come to him out of all the tribes of Israel when they make him king over the entire nation, and it's vast. It's vast. There's massive armies at his command that are out there doing his bidding. And in this thought that he is tarrying in Jerusalem while the army is out taking care of business is almost like things are so good, like he doesn't even need to be there personally. He's enjoying it being the king. It's good to be the king, to quote Mel Brooks there, which is not a good place to find yourself in. And we'll see what happens after that. Because why? He was not off leading the army in person anymore, so where is he? He's hanging out at his house and enjoying being the king. Verse 2. And it came to pass in an evening tide that David arose from off his bed, and walking upon the roof of the king's house, and from the roof he saw a woman washing herself. And the woman was very beautiful to look upon. And David sent and inquired after the woman. And one said, Is this not Bathsheba, the daughter of Eliam, the wife of Uriah the Hittite? And David sent messengers, and she came in unto him, and he lay with her. For she was purified from her uncleanness, and she returned unto her house. And the woman conceived and sent and told David and said, I am with child. Oops. We got an oops out in the audience, yeah. A big oops. There's more than one oops here. First of all, if there's any good advice from this story, it's don't look. Don't look. Why tempt yourself? Don't look. Just move away. Go back inside, David. You don't need to be doing that. Doesn't matter if she is pretty. You don't need to be doing that. Mistake number 2, you could say calling, asking who this is. He's the king. This is a polygamous time in the world. God tolerates that more than he approves of it, certainly. But that's something that's accepted. But however, when David found out that she was another man's wife, nope, mistake number 2, continuing on with that. And just like when, sometimes when you make a mistake, you end up making more mistakes to try to get out from under your first mistake. Sin leads to more sin and more. You lie, and then then you deny, and then you start, then you're messing up your relationships, and who knows? It's like you'll see on a police show or something at some point in time, right? And the police, they pull this guy over, and the cop's getting out of the car. He's going to go up there, and the guy takes off, and he starts driving away. Well, because he's got drugs in the car or something like that. Well, the police chase him down. He's running stop signs and red lights, and he smashes another car, and the police catch up. Then he jumps out and he runs, and then they tackle him, and he's squabbling or whatever, and they get him anyway. Well, you see how one crime leads to another, because they charge you with every one of those things along the way. You could have got a slap on the wrist, in probation for having a drug charge, but no, you're breaking traffic laws. You're endangering other people. You're fighting with the police, and so instead of some slap on the wrist, you end up in prison for 5 years because you didn't stop and just take the punishment when you had messed up, taking responsibility. And David, sadly, goes through this process, because verse 5 we read, she conceives. David's already messed up a few times by now, and he continues to for a minute. I'm just going to paraphrase some of this. He tries to cover it up by getting Uriah sent home from the front, but Uriah is honorable, and he says, I'm not going to go in and lay with my wife and take it easy in my house while my comrades and the Lord's armies are out there, fighting battles and the enemies. Solidarity, I'm sleeping on the steps here with the servants until you send me back. He's ready to go. So he doesn't go. And David says, well, have a drink. Have another drink. Says he makes him drunk. Thinks he'll get drunk. He'll go to his house for sure. He still doesn't go. So he sends the guy with a letter in his own hand back to Joab, saying, go put him in the front where the battle is bad, and just back off from him and let him die. Let him die. And that's a pretty low moment. Joab sends word back to David that the thing has been accomplished, and he warns the messenger that you tell David what happened, and David's going to be mad. He's going to be like, don't you guys know any better? Don't you remember this story where a woman cast down a rock from the top of the wall and it slew somebody important? I forget the names. We could read it. They're right here. It's right in this chapter here. And Joab says, well, when he says that, tell him, well, Uriah is also dead. So David's, it's not like David's sense of justice is not intact, but he has perverted it because of his own sin. And so this guy is sent, and he's like, make sure you mention this, because he's going to be mad that we screwed up, that we should know better than to make this mistake and let your servants die in this unnecessary manner. And yet that's exactly what was intended. But rightly, David would have been really mad if they had let something like that happen, if they had made some foolish mistake like that. But he twists it for his own purposes in there, and that's very sad. David goes on to marry Bathsheba, and at the end it says, but the thing David had done displeased the Lord. And it did indeed, because it went very far, trying to get out from under that mistake. Now, I can't imagine, David having to confront this righteous guy and, tell him that he got his wife pregnant. What does that do? How humiliating is that? How wrong does he know he is at this moment in time that he goes to these lengths to try to cover it up? What would it do to his reputation? Well, he ends up suffering that and more. And if you'll remember in chapter 12, the Lord sends Nathan the prophet to David, and he comes to him with this parable of a rich man and a poor man. And the rich man has flocks and herds and all this stuff. And the poor man has one little sweet ewe lamb that, he's raised from the time it was itty-bitty and is precious and dear to his heart. And when a visitor comes, the rich man, because he is powerful, takes the lamb from the poor man and kills it to serve to his guest. And David is just outraged. David thinks he's hearing about something that actually happened, and he said, we're gonna bring that guy here. We're gonna put him to death, and he's gonna restore that, 4 times over. They already killed him, so I don't know. He's gonna take it out of his goods and give it to the other guy, though. He's gonna make it right 4 times over. David knows what justice is in every instance, and then it's down in let's see. We're gonna go down to verse 7. Nathan hits David with, "You are the man. You're the one who did that." Thus says the Lord God of Israel, I anointed thee king over Israel, and I delivered thee out of the hand of Saul. And I gave thee thy master's house and thy master's wives into thy bosom, and gave thee the house of Israel and of Judah. And if that had been too little, I would moreover given unto thee such and such things. I've given you whatever, he's not limited. He's the king here. Verse 9, wherefore have you despised the commandment of the Lord, to do evil in his sight? You have killed Uriah the Hittite with the sword, and has taken his wife to be your wife, and has slain him with the sword of the children of Ammon. Now, therefore, the sword shall never depart from thine house, because you have despised me, and hast taken the wife of Uriah the Hittite to be thy wife. Thus says the Lord, behold, I will raise up evil against you out of your own house, and I will take your wives before your eyes, and give them unto your neighbor, and he shall lie with your wives in the sight of the sun. For you did it secretly, but I will do this thing before all Israel and before the sun. And David said unto Nathan, I have sinned against the Lord. And Nathan said unto David, the Lord also has put away your sin. You shall not die. Howbeit, because by this deed you have given great occasion to the enemies of the Lord to blaspheme, the child also that is born unto thee shall surely die, which is also very sad. David repents, and we, in God's forgiveness, we can believe that David repented truly and completely. And you heard the judgment that came out of David's own mouth on a parable that involved the parable maybe thought it was a true story, but it was about a sheep, and think of how angry he was. And then to get hit with the reality of it, a perfect comparison to what he had done. You have to imagine that he was terribly, terribly shaken by that. And you see the problems that it sets up that are going to last the rest of David's life. This phrase that he's given great occasion to the enemies of the Lord to blaspheme, that's very similar to the charge that's made against the Pharisees in the New Testament, that says, because of you, my name is blasphemed among the Gentiles. Because David, as the Lord's anointed, as somebody who has been, a good and a just ruler who has fought the battles of the Lord, to do something like that is so repulsive is occasion to God's enemies to criticize. David is still the Lord's anointed, but what happens to David's reputation in the eyes of the nation because of this thing? Because it went very far. It wasn't just one sin. It was multiple sins. It was murder. This is a very, very dark moment. A very dark moment, and something that he ended up suffering for more than anybody else. This is very much a cautionary tale. Remember, don't look. Don't look. It's taken you to a bad place. Don't do it. We get the good side of it, I guess. We get the lesson without having to live through the misery and the squalor of it all. We get the beautiful 51st song, which David wrote, pouring his heart out about what he had done wrong. And we sing that every year at the Passover, the Lord's Supper. We get a demonstration of the depths of God's mercy in that he didn't do away with David because of this. He didn't take his promises away from him. He's faithful. He never forsook David. And David, even though he's messed up, he never forsook God either. To go on and further show David's character, I guess, he held out hope for that child. He fasted and prayed. He was so distraught that when the child died, the servants didn't even want to go tell him. They thought, he's going to go over the edge. And he sees him talking, and he realizes that it's finished. And let's turn and read what he says about that there. That's down in verse 22, 2 Samuel 22. We're going to read through verse 25 here. 22. And David's servants, they ask him, while this kid's alive, you're fasting and weeping, and now he's dead, and you rise up. And David cleans up, and he goes and he prays before God, and then he sits down and he eats. And they're like, why is it like this? And David replies, he said, while the child was yet alive, I fasted and wept, for I said, who can tell whether God will be gracious to me, that the child may live? Concerned about this child who's why is this happening? He knows why. 23. But now he is dead. Wherefore should I fast? Can I bring him back again? I shall go to him, but he shall not return to me. And David comforted Bathsheba, his wife, and went in unto her, and lay with her, and she bare a son. And he called his name Solomon, and the Lord loved him. And he sent by the hand of Nathan the prophet, and he called his name Jedediah because of the Lord. Jedediah means beloved of the Lord. It means beloved of the Lord. And it's fairly remarkable that God would choose the son of this union to also be part of the lineage of Christ. I think it's a very, very powerful demonstration of God's mercy, and even the one that he commissioned to build the temple to God. We're talking about pivotal instances in the history of all humanity at this point in time, and this is what that comes out of. That's why we can't, you can't sell God's mercy short in any instance, because what about this is that God never abandons David. He is patient with him, he is long-suffering with him, and that is how he is with us as well. Even though, if you were faced with half of the stuff that David ended up having to endure, you'd probably be wondering, running for your life for years from Saul, having your entire family kidnapped and taken away, and having to go fight to get him back, and getting them all back intact and preserved and everything, and that stuff that he went through early on. I've never had to face anything like that, and you haven't ever had to face anything like that either. I mean, we're talking about terrible trials, but God never abandons David, and David never loses his faith in God either. But we know that from this transgression, or this series of transgression, that there's a lot of problems in David's house and in David's life that he ends up having to deal with on account of this. I'm going to paraphrase some of them here. In chapter 13, we get into it, and this is a rather grim story. One of David's sons, Amnon, he's got a thing for his sister Tamar, and essentially, he sets up this scheme where he pretends to be sick and gets her off by herself and rapes her. That's what he does. His half sister. This is an important story in the tale of David. Tamar is Absalom's sister, and if you'll remember, Absalom ends up leading a rebellion against David, but I feel like this is kind of the beginning of that conflict between Absalom and David at this point in time. In verse 21 of chapter 13, it says, "When David heard of all these things, he was very wroth." He's very wroth. He's really mad that something like this would happen inside of his family. And you can imagine that that's a vast understatement. But we don't read about there's no consequence recorded for Amnon. I mean, there is, but there isn't one that came from David. There's no punishment that happens that sets this right, and this makes Absalom very mad. Keep in mind now, Amnon is David's firstborn son, his very firstborn one, and now in a situation like this, you can assume that Amnon, because of that, is essentially the crown prince. He's the next in line for the throne, and so for him to do something like this is really beyond the pale. And how are they dealing with this? Like, it's a really big deal. I don't know. Like, did they try to keep it quiet? Is that why nothing happens? They try to hush it up and keep it inside the family or something like that? I don't know. That's some speculation on my part, but there is no recorded consequence that comes from David. But Absalom did not let it go. It says he waited 2 years. He acted like everything. Was cool. He ends up throwing a feast, if you will. He's shearing sheep, and so he invites all his brothers up there, and he tells his servants, "You watch when Amnon, he's drinking, he's having a good time. Bam, go get him." And they did, and they killed him. And all the rest of the king's sons, fled in dismay and came running back. And it was such a kerfuffle that word came to Jerusalem, to David, saying that all the king's sons are dead. Well, there's this guy there, the son of one of David's brothers. His name is Jonadab. He says, "Oh, don't worry. It's just Amnon that's dead, because Absalom has been determined to slay him since what happened with Tamar," which is kind of ironic, because when you read the story, this same guy, Jonadab, is the one who suggests the scheme to Amnon to get the girl alone. It's pretty messed up. He's so clever. He assures the king that not all of his sons are dead, but just Amnon, and kind of he's the guy that set the thing up to happen. It's pretty sick. And in the story, the girl Tamar says, don't do this. This is wrong. This is immoral. You can ask for my hand from the king. Like, he's not going to say no. That's your half sister. We can imagine maybe things are somewhat different because of the scope of history here, and things are accepted that are not necessarily kosher now, but it was just a thing, and it says what it says. What are we going to do other than deal with it? It says that. No, he doesn't do it like that. No, he rapes her, and then he's mad and he sends her away, and that's it. It's terrible. Like, it's a horrible story, and you can understand why Absalom is very angry, and I think David is very angry too, and I think he's in a situation where maybe that he doesn't know the best way to handle it or how to deal with it. I mean, I feel like we can relate to that. Sometimes things happen and you just don't know what in the world am I supposed to do with something like that. People have these kinds of problems in their lives. The world is a very sad place sometimes when you delve into the details. At any rate, after this, Absalom, he flees to the king of Geshur for 3 years. Now, the king of Geshur is his grandpa. He's the son of his mom was a princess. That's why she was married to David. It was probably a political type thing, an alliance with Geshur here. But so he flees to his grandpa. He stays there for 3 years. He stays there for 3 years. We're going to read down in chapter 13, 2 Samuel 13, verse 37. Down in verse 37. But Absalom fled and went to Talmai, the son of Ammihud, king of Geshur, and David mourned for his son every day. So Absalom fled and went to Geshur and was there 3 years. And the soul of King David longed to go forth unto Absalom, for he was comforted concerning Amnon, seeing he was dead. David was sad that Absalom was gone. I feel like he understood the anger that he probably had over the situation, and that's a terrible thing to have happen inside of your house. But he was comforted concerning that. But David misses Absalom. Was Absalom intended? Was Absalom going to be one of the next in line for the throne? Was he a particular favorite of David's? I don't want to speculate too much. Let's see. It talks down chapter 14, verse 1, the next verse there. It says, Now Joab, the son of Zeruiah, perceived that the king's heart was toward Absalom. And so he sets up this device. He has this lady come in and talking about one son killing another, and the rest of the family's crying out for blood and let him be put to death. And she said, but they're going to destroy the heir. He's the only one. And it kind of puts David in a position where then she turns it on him and says, well, why don't you call your son back? If you say nobody's going to hurt him, you're going to ensure that nobody's going to lay a hand on his head. Why don't you call your son back then? And so he does. He does end up calling his son back. And let's see, where's that? Verses 22 and 23, I believe. And David realized, he says, tell me if Joab is with you in this. And she does, and compliments the king. He says, his wisdom is an angel of God to know all things that are in the earth. And the king said unto Joab, verse 21, Behold, now I have done this thing. Go therefore, bring the young man Absalom again. And Joab fell to the ground on his face and bowed himself, and thanked the king. And Joab said, Today thy servant knows that I have found grace in thy sight, my lord, O king, in that the king has fulfilled the request of his servant. So Joab arose and went to Geshur and brought Absalom to Jerusalem. But David says, verse 24, Let him turn to his own house, and let him not see my face. So Absalom returned to his own house, and he did not see David. He didn't go into his presence or anything like that. We're gonna skip down into Absalom doesn't like that though. That rankles him, and eventually he what does he do? Doesn't he? He calls Joab. He wants to send him to the king, and Joab won't come. So he tells the servant, "Go set his field on fire." Well, then he shows up. He says, if there's anything, he said, let me see the king's face, and he said, if there's any iniquity in me, let him kill me. Let him kill me. And so they take him in, and there's a reconciliation there between David and Absalom. But probably there is already a breach in the relationship in respect. You can imagine that Absalom is very unhappy that nothing happened to Amnon over this, that he ended up taking matters in his own hand. Then he's kind of treated like a criminal. He's not even allowed to come into the king's presence after all this time. And you can imagine that rankles him. But that does not necessarily make him a good guy. So we're going to pick up in 2 Samuel 15 and verse 1 here. And it came to pass after this reconciliation, he's back in with the king. It's cool. He's okay now. Absalom prepared him chariots and horses and 50 men to run before him. Make a big show everywhere you go, huh? Like a super fancy car, just a showing off fancy car, not your daily driver at all. And Absalom rose up early and stood beside the way of the gate. And it was so that when any man had a controversy, came to the king for judgment, then Absalom called unto him and said, Of what city are you? And he would say, Thy servant is of one of the tribes of Israel. And Absalom said unto him, See, your matters are good and right, but there's no man deputed of the king to hear you. And Absalom also said, Oh, that I were made judge in the land, that every man which had any suit or cause might come unto me, and I would do him justice. What's Absalom doing here? He's setting himself up. Does he not have the power to bring these things to pass, to go to the king about them? Does he not have access at this point in time? And we just read about him specifically having access. Is David renowned for his lack of justice or judgment in Israel? That's not the vibe that you get from reading this. This is simply Absalom building a following for himself with his fancy horses and telling everybody, oh, your cause is great, but oh man, isn't it a shame that there's nobody to set things right? Sorry. Instead of doing something that could help or fix the problem or trying to do anything for those people. No, it's about him. Verse 5. And it was so that when any man came nigh to him to do obeisance, to come bow before him or something, because he is a prince, that he would put forth his hand and took him and kissed him. And on this manner did Absalom to all Israel that came to the king for judgment. So Absalom stole the hearts of the men of Israel. It is kind of a mock humility there. They're going to bow down, and instead he picks them up and kisses them on the cheek like they're brothers and equals and all of that, despite his other outward displays of fanciness. Right? It's conniving. It's definitely conniving. Let's keep going here, verse 7. And it came to pass after 40 years, we're not talking about just a little while, this goes on for a long time, that Absalom said unto the king, I pray thee, let me go and pay my vow, which I have vowed unto the Lord in Hebron. For thy servant vowed a vow while I abode at Geshur in Syria, saying, If the Lord shall bring me again indeed to Jerusalem, then I will serve the Lord. And the king said unto him, Go in peace. And he arose and went to Hebron. But this is not what that's about. This is the beginning of a giant rebellion. And you can read here that a lot of people were gathered to him for this purpose. He says he sends spies out, that there were people that were called from Jerusalem in their innocence. It points that out, who had no part in that, but were called to go with him and come do this thing. But this is certainly a conspiracy that Absalom is now putting into place. Verse 12, it says, And the conspiracy was strong, for the people increased continually with Absalom. David ends up getting word back about that, and we can see where that leads. And you can imagine. Well, let's just read right here in verse 13. And there came a messenger unto David, saying, The hearts of the men of Israel are after Absalom. And David said unto all his servants that were with him at Jerusalem, Arise, and let us flee, for we shall not else escape from Absalom. Make speed to depart, lest he overtake us suddenly, and bring evil upon us, and smite the city with the edge of the sword. And the king's servants said unto the king, Behold, thy servants are ready to go to do whatsoever my lord the king shall appoint. And the king went forth, and all his household after him. And the king left 10 women, which were concubines, to keep the house. And he runs. David runs for his life from his son at this point in time. You can imagine that David might be thinking of the warning that he was given from God through Nathan about the sword not departing from his house in this moment. And in this leaving behind of the concubines, it sets up the other aspect of what was prophesied as to what you do in secret, I will do in the light. And we'll get to that here in a moment. But I feel like David's attitude in this is also remarkable in that he says, we got to run. It's time to go. It's time to go, unless he destroys the whole city and this turns into a massacre here for the people that are left with me. We got to just get up and get out of here. And I would read down in verse 25, because they bring out the ark to go with David. And the king says unto Zadok in verse 25, carry back the ark of God into the city. If I shall find favor in the eyes of the Lord, he will bring me again and show me both it and his habitation. David trusts in God. He says, if God is going to bring me through, to keep the ark here where it belongs, if God is going to bring me through this, then I'll be back and I'll see it again. That's quite an attitude. That's pretty amazing. I mean, he's been king for a long time at this point. You know, if he realizes that this is an extension of errors that he's made that are catching up at this point in time, I don't know, but I think that David had that kind of insight and wisdom and humility. It's a very humble thing to say. Further, let's go over to the next chapter, 2 Samuel 16 and verse 5. 2 Samuel 16, verse 5, we're going to go right here. And when King David came to Bahurim, behold, thence came out a man of the family of the house of Saul, whose name was Shimei, the son of Gera. And he came forth and cursed still as he came. And he cast stones at David and at all the servants of King David. And all the people and all the mighty men were on his right hand and on his left. And this is a pretty bold move at this point in time. And thus said Shimei when he cursed, come out, you bloody man, and you man of Belial, murderer, sinful guy, sons of Belial, like demons and bad stuff. You can call in the king that. It's not good. Verse 8, the Lord has returned upon you all the blood of the house of Saul, in whose stead you have reigned, and the Lord has delivered the kingdom into the hand of Absalom thy son. And behold, you are taken in your mischief, because you are a bloody man. And you imagine people from the house of Saul had more grievance. They were the last ones to hold out as far as allowing David to be king of Israel. That still rankled. And I'm sure, as was pointed out in the other scripture, David's mistake, this mistake that he made, this big, mistake that ended up being public, hurt his reputation as well. Then said Abishai, the son of Zeruiah, unto the king, in verse 9, why should this dead dog curse my lord the king? Let me go over, I pray thee, and take off his head. And the king said, what have I to do with you, you sons of Zeruiah? So let him curse, because the Lord has said unto him, curse David. Who shall then say, wherefore have you done so? David says, let it go. And David said to Abishai and to all his servants, behold, my son, which came forth out of my bowels, seeks my life. How much more now may this Benjamite do it? Let him alone, and let him curse, for the Lord has bidden him. It may be that the Lord will look on my affliction, and that the Lord will requite me good for his cursing this day. It's very humble. It's a very humble thing. The power was in his hand right then and there. His guys were willing. Let's go get him. Who does this guy think he is? He said, what's the cause? Look at what's happening right now. Look at where we are and what we're doing. And this guy is going to throw rocks and sand. It's not the worst thing that's going on this day, on a day that's already rather bad. But that's a very humble thing of David to say, and that's a good attitude to have about letting God rectify it. And you see it in his attitude with this, in leaving the ark behind, in not staying and resisting. He's very humble. He says, I got to go. This is what's happening. I got to go. His trust is in the Lord to bring it about. And you could see that in his character. And, the whole time Saul was chasing him around. The same thing. God is going to work this out, how he is going to work it out. And that's a remarkable thing. Where are we going to go now? 2 Samuel 16, 5, 12. I did that. So we're going to go down to verse 20 and 23. This is the fulfilling of the prophecy of what David did in secret being done in the light. Verse 20, then said Absalom to Ahithophel. Ahithophel was a very wise counselor. Give counsel among you what we shall do. And Ahithophel said unto Absalom, go in unto thy father's concubines, which he hath left to keep the house, and all Israel shall hear that thou art abhorred of thy father, and then shall the hands of all that are with thee be strong. Does that make sense to you? Let's talk about why that makes sense. It puts Absalom in a position that he can't very well retreat from, if you know what I mean. By doing this, it's kind of a public display that he's completely finished. He's going through with it. He's going after David. This is something that is not good. And Ahithophel said, the people might be on the fence. They might be like, is Absalom, how's this going to turn out? Is he really committed to this? Are we really going to follow this guy? There might be some doubt about this. But in this deed, he's going to show that he is very much committed to this course of action. It's a gross thing, but this is what happened. Verse 22. So they spread Absalom a tent upon the top of the house, and Absalom went in unto his father's concubines in the sight of all Israel. Verse 23, and the counsel of Ahithophel, which he counseled in those days, was as if a man had inquired at the oracle of God. And so was the counsel of Ahithophel, both with David and with Absalom, which is a rather remarkable statement considering what we have just read. But this is just to point out, I guess, that in human terms, Ahithophel is the dude. If you want advice on how to get things done, Ahithophel is the guy to go to. And it's we set up this conflict between Ahithophel and David. Has an old friend. His name's Hushai the Archite, who's also a counselor, and he's going to go with David. And David says, "Stay behind." It may be that you can defeat the good counsel of Ahithophel. And as David's running, Ahithophel says, we need to go right now, track him down while they're tired, and smite all of them and get this over with. And Absalom's like, all the guys are like, yeah, that sounds pretty good. They're like, but let's get Hushai in here. Let's see what he says as well. And Hushai's like, nope, that's not a good idea. You shouldn't do that. He said, because everybody knows that your dad is a rough dude, and the guys that are with him are big, scary dudes. I mean, you read about the deeds of David's mighty men, and he says, it's going to be, if some of your servants, and he said, your father's a man of war. He's going to be hiding in a hole somewhere. You're never going to find him. He said, when your guys start getting knocked down, the rumors are going to go around that there's a slaughter among the people who follow Absalom, and everybody's going to be like, no, never mind. Like, we're not with Absalom anymore. We don't want to be with Absalom. And you can see how that appeals to them. They're like, they're right. David is a man of war, and those guys are really scary, like rough dudes. We all know that. We've known that for years now. Very experienced in battle. And he says, so you wait, and you get all Israel together with you, and you go after him, and you pull him down in force. And they're like, wow, Hushai's advice is better than Ahithophel's. And that just devastates Ahithophel. He goes home and he kills himself, which is a net gain for David because Ahithophel's counsel was better. That's what this is saying here, that Ahithophel, you want to know how to get things done, you ask that guy. It says Hushai, to defeat the good counsel of Ahithophel. And he does. And, it ends up bringing about Absalom's defeat, because he does defeat him. David was very vulnerable in that moment, exhausted, defeated, depressed, and think of what he's doing and running, and it's just terrible. They didn't have supplies yet or anything like that. He leaves some guys behind, and they get word back to him, and they say what both people have counseled, and David's like, all right, well, quick, we got to get up and go farther now before they hurry up and catch up with us and wipe us out. So we see how that ends up being a net gain for David in the end. Absalom does get defeated. Let's go over to chapter 18, down in verse 9, and I need to hurry with the rest of this. Down in verse 9, we're going to read a little ways here. Absalom met the servants of David. Absalom rode on a mule, and he went under the thick boughs of an oak, and his head was caught hold of on the oak, and he was taken up between heaven and earth, and the mule that was under him went away. And oaks, and they got these long spreading branches. Dude got trapped. This mule probably panicked after he ran into these soldiers. I guess I'll just paraphrase this. And he's stuck there. And somebody comes and tells Joab, and Joab goes over, and Joab and his servants kill Absalom, even though he had been charged by David. Do not hurt Absalom. You fight, you protect us, but you don't hurt that young man. And Joab says to the guy who found him, like, why didn't you kill him? I would have given you some silver and some changes of clothes. And the guy says, no, you wouldn't. He said, your hand would have been against me as well. And Joab's like, I don't have time for this. And he goes and he does it anyway. But that David did say that. David is, let's see. Joab blows the trumpet in verse 16, and everybody returns from pursuing after Israel. Joab held back the people, so there wasn't great slaughter. Verse 17, and they took Absalom and cast him into a great pit in the woods and laid a very great heap of stones upon him. Let's jump down to verse 39 in the same chapter, verse 39. No, that can't be right. Am I reading in the wrong spot? Oh, for verse 32, beg pardon. I jumped a line in my notes here. And the king said unto Cushai, is the young man Absalom safe? And Cushai answered, the enemies of my lord the king, and all that rise against thee to do thee hurt, be as that young man is. And the king was much moved, and went up to the chamber over the gate, and wept. And as he went, thus he said, O my son Absalom, my son Absalom, would God that I had died for thee, O Absalom, my son, my son. He's very merciful. His concern is for his child, for these terrible things that have come to pass that David heard about a very, very long time before. And he knows how that got set up. And so it's a very sad moment that even in victory, even in maintaining his role, his throne, his kingship in Israel, that it feels there's an feeling of defeat to it because of how it transpired. David returns to Jerusalem. I'll go through the rest of this down in chapter 19, verse 9. And all the people were at strife throughout all the tribes of Israel, saying, The king saved us out of the hand of our enemies, and he delivered us out of the hand of the Philistines, and now he's fled out of the land for Absalom. And Absalom, who he anointed over us, is dead in battle. Now, therefore, why speak you not a word of bringing the king back? And King David sent unto Zadok and to Abiathar, the priests, saying, Speak unto the elders of Judah, saying, Why are you the last to bring the king back to his house, seeing the speech of all Israel is come to the king, even to his house? You are my brethren, you are my bones and my flesh. Wherefore then are you the last to bring back the king? And say you to Amasa, Art thou not of my bone and of my flesh? They are also related. God, and he was the captain of the host under Absalom. God do to me, and more also, if thou be not captain of the host before me continually in the room of Joab. And he bowed the heart of all the men of Judah, even as the heart of one man, so that they sent this word unto the king, Return now, and all thy servants. So the king returned and came to Jordan, and Judah came to Gilgal to go and meet the king, to conduct the king over Jordan. And Shimei, the son of Gera, a Benjamite, which was of Bahurim, hasted and came down with the men of Judah to meet King David. Keep in mind, this is a guy that was throwing rocks and cursing at him as he left. And there were 1,000 men of Benjamin with him, and Ziba and the servants of the house of Saul and his 15 sons and his 20 servants with him, and they went over Jordan before the king. And there went over a ferry boat to carry over the king's household and to do what he thought good. And Shimei, the son of Gera, fell down before the king as he was come over Jordan, and said unto the king, Let not my lord impute iniquity unto me, neither do thou remember that which thy servants did perversely in the day my lord the king went out of Jerusalem, that the king should take it to his heart. For thy servant doth know that I have sinned. Therefore, behold, I am come the first this day of all the house of Joseph to go down to meet my lord the king. But Abishai, the son of Zeruiah, answered and said, Shall not Shimei be put to death for this, because he cursed the Lord's anointed? And David said, What have I to do with you, you sons of Zeruiah, that you should this day be adversaries unto me? Shall there any man be put to death this day in Israel? For do not I know that I am this day king over Israel? Therefore the king said unto Shimei, Thou shalt not die. And the king sware unto him. He's merciful. David is merciful in two specific instances right now to people who had turned on him, who were part of this conspiracy, who were cursing him, who were part of the plot to track him down and murder him. And yet David in this return is merciful. And yet in this we see that there are the seeds of future fragmentation inside of Israel, sown at this point in time. In verse 39, down in the same chapter, all the people go over Jordan. The king comes over. He's coming back. All the people come to conduct him. And the men of Israel come to the king in verse 41, and they say, Why have our brethren, the men of Judah, stolen you away and have brought the king and all his household and David's men with him over Jordan? If you'll remember, he sent messengers to Judah, and it's like the rest of Israel was like, How are you going to do this, without inviting us or letting us be here or be a part of it or anything like that? Verse 42, And all the men of Judah answered the men of Israel, Because the king is near of kin to us. Wherefore then be you angry for this matter? Have we eaten at the king's cost, or has he given us any gift? And the men of Israel answered the men of Judah and said, We have 10 parts in the king, and we have also more right in David than you. Why then did you despise us, that our advice should not be first had in bringing back our king? And the words of the men of Judah were fiercer than the words of the men of Israel. Already you see, what's coming, not too far in the future, in historical terms at least, a split that's going to become between Judah and the rest of and the rest of Israel. And that's a sad thing, but that's something that had to come about as well for a different purpose in God's plan, I suppose. And the very beginning of the next chapter is another rebellion that Joab ends up having to track down and to put down, and that's a lot of sad stuff that comes out of this. And yet David is restored to Jerusalem, back to the throne. The nation is still intact under his rule. It does not fragment or anything like that yet, as God has promised. And David lives that out. And there's been a lot of sad stuff in this today. But we tend to put David on a pedestal, and rightly so. We do that for a reason. God essentially put David on a pedestal as well, and he will again in the future. But when you look at his life, it was brutally challenging in war and in intrigue and having to flee from your life and the problems inside of his own household and humiliation for his sins and all of this stuff. That's a very hard thing. You might think, David is, like a number one top hero you could pick, top of the heap type hero. Like it would be, that guy. It'd be great. It'd be great to be like that guy. And then you read what that guy had to go through, and you realize, the thing that matters is God's mercy and having faith and staying true no matter what. That's what makes David that hero that garners so much love and respect is that very thing. David had God's Holy Spirit, and he had a sincere and an upright heart, and that's a victory that surpasses every other consideration. And we have that, and we have the same assurance that if we don't give up inside of any trial, if we don't turn our backs on God and walk away, that he's not going to turn his back and walk away on us either. As long as we repent and we return to him and we stay humble and faithful and true, he'll bring us through as he brought David through. And that's really the overarching lesson of these stories and what I hope to get across, because life is very, very hard at times, as it was for David. But that does not mean that we do not have the victory. And I'm going to close with Deuteronomy 31:6, which I'll just quote. "Be strong and of a good charge. Fear not, nor be afraid of them. For the Lord thy God, he it is that does go with you. He will not fail you or forsake you."